Over 800 horsepower, 1 ton of car, no ABS, no traction control, nothing between you and whatever happens next. And the man who built it drove it home once and decided the world wasn't ready for it. That happened in Blackpool, in a factory most people drove past without a second look. It happened because of TVR. In this video, we're telling the full TVR story, how a tiny northern British firm built some of the most extreme road cars in the world, collapsed under the weight of its own ambitions, and survived to try again. To understand any of it, you need to go back to 1947. A young engineer named Trevor Wilkinson was renting a lock-up garage in Blackpool, Lancashire. He wasn't building a business empire, he was building a car. He had a simple chassis, Ford running gear, and the belief that a small, light sports car, properly engineered, could be something special. The name he gave the car was TVR. It came from the middle letters of his own first name, TVR. If nothing else, you have to admire the honesty of that. Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, TVR built compact sports cars out of that Blackpool base. Fiberglass bodies over tubular steel frames, made for drivers who wanted something alive under their hands. The cars weren't always reliable. TVR changed hands more than once, ran into financial trouble more than once, and came close to disappearing entirely. A lesser marque might have taken the hint. But the factory stayed in Blackpool, and the spirit of the thing stayed too. The man who changed the trajectory arrived in the late 1970s. Peter Wheeler had made his money in the chemical industry, and he brought two things to TVR: engineering conviction and the funds to back it. By 1981, he was the majority owner, and he set about making the marque into something serious. What followed through the 1980s and into the 1990s was one of the best runs any small British sports car maker has ever had. The Griffith appeared, a short, wide, Rover V8-powered roadster that would light up the rear tires before most drivers had finished collecting themselves. Then the Chimera, a touch more forgiving, though not by much. Then the Cerbera, TVR's first real Grand Tourer, built around TVR's own straight-six engine rather than a bought-in unit. None of those cars came with ABS. None had traction control. No airbags either. Wheeler was proud of that. He believed driving aids put a layer of cotton wool between a driver and the truth of the car. TVR customers tended to agree. Anyone who disagreed probably bought a Volvo. But there was one more car Wheeler wanted to build. One that would settle the question of how extreme a British road car could really be. The idea started with an engine. By the mid-1990s, TVR's engineers were already developing what would become the Speed 6, a straight-six unit built entirely in-house, putting out roughly 350 to 400 horsepower in road form. That was a real achievement for a factory the size of TVR's, but Wheeler wanted more. He asked what would happen if you took two Speed 6 engines and joined them together on a common crankcase. The answer was a 7.7-litre V12, built by TVR, from TVR Architecture in Blackpool. Engineers Al Melling and John Ravenscroft developed the engine family, and when the test bench finally ran it properly, the power reading climbed past 800 brake horsepower and kept going. The dyno was rated to 1,000 horsepower. The engine pinned the needle. Nobody quite knew what to do with a number like that. When you're building road cars for the public, 800 horsepower in a car weighing roughly 1,000 kilograms isn't a specification, it's a problem statement. But Wheeler didn't see a problem, he saw a car. The plan took shape across 1996 and 1997. TVR would build the Cerbera Speed 12, a stretched and widened version of the Cerbera platform designed to sit over that enormous engine. The body was long and low and serious looking. Nothing like the compact Griffiths and Chimeras that had built TVR's reputation. This was something different. You looked at the Speed 12 and understood immediately that it had not been designed with your comfort in mind. TVR was thinking on two tracks at once. On one track, a road car for paying customers. On the other, a GT racing program targeting British GT and, eventually, Le Mans. The idea of a Blackpool-built V12 fighting at the Circuit de la Sarthe sounds like someone's fever dream until you realize TVR had the engine to back it up. A racing version of the Speed 12 was built and competed in British GT. The Le Mans ambitions were real, not just press release noise. In 1997, TVR showed the Project 712 concept publicly. People who saw it tended to lean forward, and then take a small step back. The car had the proportions of something designed to cover ground very quickly and treat corners as a secondary concern. The wheelbase was stretched. The body was wide enough to house all those mechanicals, and underneath the fiberglass sat a V12 that made almost every contemporary hypercar look modest. Picture this. The McLaren F1, the benchmark road car of the 1990s, produced 627 horsepower from its BMW-built V12 and weighed around 1,140 kilograms. The performance was so extraordinary, it redefined what a road car could do. The Speed 12 reportedly made 800 horsepower, possibly more, in a body weighing around 1,000 kilograms. On paper, the Blackpool machine had no business being in that conversation. And yet there it was. Power figures for the Speed 12 vary depending on the source. Some accounts place output at 800 brake horsepower. Others suggest the number was higher. What nobody seriously disputes is that the dyno ran out of range before the engine ran out of power. But here's where it gets strange. Peter Wheeler was not a man who frightened easily. He had built TVR into the marque. It was precisely because he believed other manufacturers were too cautious, too shaped by committees and liability lawyers, and the desire to upset nobody. He had stripped out the driver aids his competitors insisted were essential and sold the resulting cars to people who wanted to feel everything. He took a Speed 12 road prototype home. He drove it. Then he cancelled the road program. Wheeler's reasoning, as reported in various accounts of the car's history, was direct. The Speed 12 was too fast and too violent for public roads. Not in the wink-wink, too extreme way manufacturers sometimes deploy as a selling point. In a genuine, considered way. He decided that no customer should be handed the keys to something that unpredictable on ordinary tarmac. TVR returned deposits to the customers who had placed orders. The road car was over. That decision landed sometime around 2000. A handful of chassis, and the racing car survived. The road program was buried at what should have been its moment of triumph. The survivors are worth noting. The racing version of the Speed 12 had already run in British GT. Several chassis existed, and in 2003, TVR sold one completed road-spec Speed 12 to a private buyer, after making absolutely certain he understood what he was getting into. By all accounts, he was not put off. That car still exists somewhere, surfacing rarely, owned by someone sensible enough to keep it mostly out of sight. Peter Wheeler ran TVR until 2004, when he sold the company to a young Russian businessman named Nikolai Smolensky. Wheeler had grown the marque from a struggling outfit into something genuinely admired. At its peak, the Blackpool factory was turning out hundreds of hand-built cars a year, all raw, all honest, all carrying that TVR character. When he left, the thread that connected everything snapped. Production slowed under the new ownership. Development stopped. The Blackpool factory went quiet around 2006. The place that had built Griffiths and Chimeras and that extraordinary Speed 12 closed its doors. TVR spent years in limbo. Announcements came and went. The marque passed through silence the way old British institutions sometimes do, leaving enthusiasts unsure whether to mourn or wait. In 2013, a new ownership group acquired the brand. Les Edgar led the purchase. And in 2017, a new Griffith was announced. V8 powered, built in Wales, aimed at drivers who want to feel what they're driving and have the skill to manage it. No hybrid assistance. No committee-approved softening of the character. Production has been slow and difficult. Whether the new Griffith reaches full output is still an open question. But TVR survived a factory closure, a decade of silence, and one engine so violent its own creator refused to sell it. That Speed 12, handed over with a warning attached, remains the clearest statement anyone ever made about what this marque believed. Not for everyone, never was. Britain's wildest car maker, built in Blackpool, still here.